Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own unique Black Belt leader within. Now, let me pose a question as we start this week's lesson, and it's an interesting one. What do Otto von Bismarck, Harrison Ford, Steven Spielberg, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Hannibal, and Napoleon Bonaparte, what do they all have in common? Now, some of you are probably asking, who in the world is Otto von Bismarck? Well, let me tell you, that's a valid question. So I want to introduce you to a man known as the Iron Chancellor. And I want to pose a very important question that every single leader has got to answer at some point, and probably multiple points as they go through their leadership journey. And that question is a simple but profound one. What is your plan B? Now, what I want to share for the next few moments is a life lesson from Otto von Bismarck. Now, according to history, Otto von Bismarck was a master strategist. He was a Prussian statesman who served as the prime minister of Prussia and became the very first chancellor of the German Empire. He was known as the Iron Chancellor because he used military force and political skill to unite 39 separate German states into a powerful empire in 1871. So, born in 1815, the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, his family were members of a group called the Junkers. Now, these were land-owning aristocrats with very strong conservative views. The Junkers were a very powerful social class. They dominated the Prussian military, they dominated government leadership, and they were very strong supporters of the Prussian monarchy. So it was there that Otto learned to manage the family estate, and it earned him a reputation as a practical country squire with conservative agrarian values. Now, Otto von Bismarck, again, the Iron Chancellor, he entered politics in 1847, and it was there he was a fierce defender of Junker privileges and was a champion of the monarchy's right to rule. Now, his fierce defending of the aristocracy won him both the admiration and the favor of King William I, who appointed him as prime minister in 1862. And it was there that Otto went on to orchestrate the revolution from above. He united Germany through a series of wars against Denmark, against Austria, and against France. And in 1879, he assured the economic survival of the Junkers as he shifted Germany's trade policy towards perfectionism. He placed a high tariff on cheap imported grain and also on foreign steel. So this protected the Junkers' rye estates as well as the industrial iron barons through a powerful political coalition known as the Alliance of Iron and Rye. Now, interestingly enough, Otto von Bismarck was also a very prudent student of human behavior, and he enacted the world's very first welfare state system. It included accident insurance and an old age pension. These were precursors to programs like Medicare and Social Security here in the United States. And by providing economic security to the working class, he ensured that they would in turn not overthrow the aristocratic home social order. Now, Otto von Bismarck was not only a skillful politician, he was a brilliant political strategist. His true genius lay in his ability to lay out grand strategy and to engage in diplomatic manipulation. So Otto decided when to fight, whom to fight, and when to stop. He created political crises, isolated his enemies diplomatically, and managed the post-war peace. While he left the actual warfare to the generals himself, Bismarck was known for using his political savvy to set the stage for conflict. He was exceptionally skilled at provoking his enemies into declaring war, so Prussia always looked like the victim. And always looking one step ahead of his opponents, there was always a contingency plan in place, just in case things didn't go as planned. To those around him that knew him, it became known as the Bismarck backup. Today, we call it Plan B. Now, throughout history, we've seen very similar tactics to those of Otto von Bismarck utilized by the likes of Julius Caesar, by Alexander the Great, by Hannibal, and even Napoleon Bonaparte. Each one of these military individuals taught their soldiers not to rely solely on a single approach to warfare. but they taught their soldiers to improvise as the fluidity of battle demanded a different approach. And because of this, their troops were able to adapt to the shifting chaos of the battlefield, and it forced their enemies to retreat to, at times, unconventional tactics that were brought forth by these incredible armies. And even today, our special forces, the Rangers, the Delta Force, the SEALs, they all train to respond to an ever shifting dynamic of warfare. They take the time to think through the what ifs that can and do occur in real time on the battlefield. And their ability to improvise, to adapt, and to keep moving forward, that allows these special forces teams to complete their mission, often against overwhelming odds. Because when things go wrong, and at times they will, having a plan B in place just in case can be the difference between success and failure. Now, in 1981, Steven Spielberg introduced to the world a history professor turned archaeologist, Dr. Indiana Jones. And it was in the first of the three-part original trilogy that Dr. Jones is hired by the U.S. government to find the biblical Ark of the Covenant before Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime can use its supernatural powers to create an invincible army. So to locate the lost Ark, what does Dr. Jones do? Well, first, he turns to a former girlfriend, Marion Ravenwood, and it was there that he secures an amulet in her possession that contained a map to the burial chamber of the Ark. And together they travel from Nepal to Cairo, where they began to embark on a quest to locate the Ark. Well, it was there in Cairo that they were aided by Indiana's longtime friend, Salah, who provides shelter, logistical support, and he even helps to find the map room and ultimately the Well of Souls. But at every turn, Indiana and Marion were pursued by Nazi henchmen. Now, in probably one of the most iconic scenes of the entire trilogy, Marion had been trapped inside of a large straw basket, and she's in the process of being kidnapped. Indiana Jones is desperately trying to locate and rescue her, but in the midst of the chaos in the market, the crowd parts to reveal a black-robed assassin brandishing an oversized Schmider. Now, he dramatically twirls and flourishes this blade, seeking to intimidate Indiana Jones. And rather than engage this assassin directly, Indiana Jones does something unexpected. He simply pulls out his revolver and shoots the assassin dead. To this day, that scene in the movie is probably considered one of the most iconic, the most quoted, and one of the most funniest movements in cinematic history. To me, it highlights Indiana Jones' practical but impatient personality. But what a lot of people don't know is the original script of the movie called for a very distinct, choreographed whip and sword battle royale. The original plan was to engage in a lengthy, multi-day choreographed sword fight. But Harrison Ford, along with several members of the crew, were suffering from severe dysentery while they were on the set in Tunisia. And Harrison's dysentery was so severe, he could only shoot for a very short interval at time. So as Harrison Ford and Steven Spielberg discussed how they could shorten the scene, Ford simply asked, "Can't I just shoot him?" Spielberg thought for a moment and said, "Well, of course, yes, you can." And the rest is cinematic history. This Plan B moment in the movie is still considered today a legendary piece of film improvisation and adaptation. Well, both the stuntman and the swordman, I believe they deserve immense credit for setting up Harrison Ford's deadpan delivery. And that really became the hallmark of the Indiana Jones trilogy movie. We still talk about it today. Now, in martial arts training, a Plan B refers to a secondary or contingent technique when your primary attack is blocked or countered or defended by your opponent. We teach practitioners to chain techniques together so they can move swiftly from a failed strike, a takedown, or a sweep and move immediately into a secondary or a tertiary attack without losing momentum or without losing their tactical advantage. And as students spar and grapple, they learn how to adapt, how to pivot, and how to move from one technique to another in real time. And they do this to the point that they can do it without conscious thought. They developed a mindset of improvisation that's characterized by their ability to move from plan A to plan B to plan C without even having to pause or to think. It's in the chaos of conflict on the mat that there's no time for a one size fits all response. This is, as I've shared before, the art of Mushin. You don't think, you just do. Because you got to remember, when things go wrong, and at times they will, having a plan B in place, just in case, can be the difference between success and failure. So at this point, you may ask, okay, John, great stories, but what does this have to do with leadership? Well, I'm glad you asked because that's where I want to go in this lesson. You need to understand leaders go first. Leaders show the way. They lead the way. And as such, a leader is expected to know more, to see more, and to prepare the people they're leading to be able to do more. You got to remember the role of a leader is to equip and train the people they're leading so together they can achieve success. But because leaders see more, they're expected to look ahead and to anticipate the challenges that await around the corner. They've got to be able to recognize the perilous obstacles that may loom in the distance before they become obvious to those that they're leading. And at the same time, they've got to be able to adapt, to pivot, or to move from one plan to an alternative in real time. They've got to be able to respond to the inevitable conflict that's going to show up and that at some point in the journey is going to impede the progress of the team. Good leaders always prepare a Bismarck backup just in case it's needed. Black belt leaders plan for the known. They plan for the known unknown, and they plan for the unknown unknown. Now, the known are the things that as a leader, you can reasonably anticipate. If you're meeting with the team on a Monday, knowing the deadline for a project is on Friday, that's a known commodity. It's something you know. If you know the resources you have, you know who's available to work on the project, and you know what skills they bring to the team. Again, known commodities. These are things that are known to you and everyone on the team. Now, these are the obvious things that every leader should know and must know to be successful. But preparing for what you know is going to happen, that's not contingency planning. Any leader, regardless of their experience, can prepare for the obvious. But it's only the initial first step that a true leader must take as they develop a more cohesive approach to planning for success. You got to remember, black belt leaders, they plan for the known. But the real test of a black belt leader is when things deviate from the plan. Now, a black belt leader must also consider the known unknown. Now, what is that? These are the things that you know might happen, but you're simply not sure whether or not they will or not. It's like, what if a shipment is delayed? What if a key team member that you're counting on to get the job done gets sick or injured? What do you do if there's an equipment malfunction, there's a natural disaster, or you're relying on a technology that all of a sudden fails? What happens if your client's timeline changes and they need that project completed sooner than you anticipated? In these situations, are you as a leader prepared to pivot, to improvise, or to adapt? Well, I can tell you that a black belt leader is going to consider these what if scenarios, and they're going to plan accordingly. They plan for the known unknown. Because you got to remember, when things go wrong, and sometimes they will, having a plan B in place just in case can be the difference between success and failure. But I can tell you from experience, there's also going to be times when the unknown shows up. And it's in those moments that your leadership gets tested in real time. Now, the unknown are the circumstances and the events that you and we couldn't foresee, because things can, will, and do happen that are totally unexpected. As a black belt leader, we understand there are some things we simply can't prepare for. Sometimes life is going to demand that you and I pivot and adapt and improvise in real time. Let me give you a couple of examples. Nobody knew that we would wake up on September 11th, 2001 to a terror attack on American soil and the aftermath that would follow as we recovered from that event. Nobody knew we would wake up to experience a novel pandemic, COVID-19, that would literally shut the world down just a few years ago. And nobody anticipated two major earthquakes measuring 7.2 and 7.5 on the Richter scale that happened back to back to cripple Venezuela, nor the 7.4 earthquake that just jolted Colombia and Ecuador in the last few hours. Now, there was no plan B in those moments, sitting somewhere in a corporate binder, waiting for someone to go pull it off the shelf and implement it. In those moments, leaders from around the world, they had to pivot, they had to improvise, and they had to adapt at a moment's notice. But unknown unknowns don't always have to be global in scale. There are unknown unknowns that show up unannounced in every business, sometimes in the most unexpected moments. So what do you do as a leader when life doesn't go as expected? Let me give you a personal example. About 3 weeks ago, my neighborhood and several others in this community, we experienced a major electrical power outage. It was caused by an equipment malfunction. Now, I was scheduled to provide a 2-hour sales training to a national organization with an anticipated 85 to 100 people on Zoom. And 2 minutes before the scheduled start time, much of our city was plunged into darkness. Now, I got no notice. I didn't have an opportunity to give that team any advance warning. There was nothing weather related. It just happened. The equipment failed. I'm logging into the organization's Zoom account when my power goes out. The internet goes down, and every alternative login site I could go to anywhere in the city, those were also powerless. And it's in a moment like that that your leadership is tested. Well, I was fortunate that I did have cell service, so I called the organizer and I explained to them in real time what was happening. So we immediately pivoted. We set an alternate training date right there while everybody else was on the Zoom call. So the organizer was able to share with everyone what had happened and why, and in real time, we pivoted to a plan B. And a short time later, I was able to deliver that scheduled training, this time without a hitch. And in doing so, I had the privilege and opportunity to provide valuable sales training to this national organization that's going to help them exceed their production goals for the years. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that events like this can and do happen, and it's probably happened to you. But how you respond when these unknown unknowns happen says a lot about you and your ability to lead. For the known, black belt leaders have a plan. For the known unknown, they create a contingency plan. And for the unknown unknown, they possess the capacity to pivot, to adapt, and to improvise. Now, why is this important? Because when things go wrong, and at times they will, having a plan B in place, just in case, can be the difference between success and failure. You need to understand that you may not be able to control everything that happens next, but here's what you can control: how you prepare so you're able to respond regardless of what happens. But that also begs the question, what happens when plan B becomes plan A? Well, I'm here to tell you that once plan A goes out the window, plan B is no longer plan B. That plan B, that contingency plan, has now become plan A. A black belt leader understands when a crisis happens, plan B isn't the contingency. It's how you and the team keep moving forward. So when your initial plan goes up in smoke, it's very easy to pause and say, what just happened? And while it's important to examine the failure of your plan A at some point in the future, looking back in the moment doesn't improve the current situation. You've got to keep moving forward. And once the circumstance change, plan B becomes the mission. This is how you get the team from where they are to the finish line. Now, I believe there's 4 critical steps in the process that you've got to implement in order to recover, reset, and resolve to move forward when plan B becomes plan A. First, you got to prepare. Now, this is when you proactively think through the scenarios of the known and the known unknown, and you plan accordingly. What I love about preparation is it gives you options in the event things don't go as planned. In business, like in martial arts, you don't rise to the occasion nearly as often as you fall to the level of your training. So, what I love is preparation gives you options, and options create confidence. And confidence is going to elevate your ability to lead and your team's ability to perform. So, plan B begins long before plan A ever fails. Now, the second thing you've got to do is you've got to be ready to pivot. Remember, Harrison Ford and Steven Spielberg, they pivoted when their planned fight sequence became impractical due to the health of the actors and the crew. So the scene was radically simplified. Indiana Jones simply drew his revolver and shot the swordsman. And this, as we know, became one of the most memorable moments in the movie. So the lesson here is not to abandon the plan simply when things get difficult, because plan A never guarantees an easy pathway to success, and neither does plan B or plan C or plan D. The lesson that's revealed to us in this moment is even more practical. Never become so committed to a plan that you lose sight of the objective. Let me say that again. Never be so committed to a plan that you lose sight of your objective. You got to remember the method may change, but the mission remains the same. And sometimes you've got to change the plan to achieve the goal. A leader understands plan A is a plan, but it's not the only plan that can get you to the finish line, especially when plan A's not working. Now, in business as in martial arts, you commit to the destination, but you've got to remain flexible in the approach. You got to understand there's more than one road to success, and sometimes you've got to take an alternate route. If what you're doing's not working, at some point you've got to pivot and try something else. Now, the third P in the process is you've got to perform, because once you've pivoted, it's now time to execute. And yes, the temptation is always there to go back and try plan A one more time. But once you've seen it's not working, you've got to commit to the new course of action. Now, there's a point in every situation where your contingency plan has got to become your contingency performance. When plan B becomes plan A, you've got to fully commit to its execution. You got to remember that leadership is measured by your ability to produce results. And your ability to produce results has to happen even when reality refuses to cooperate with your initial plan. You got to prepare, you got to pivot, and you got to perform. Now, the fourth thing is something I talk about often, and that's persistence. Stubborn people commit to a plan. They're focused solely on the process. But persistent people, they commit to the outcome. They're focused on the goal. Persistent people are willing to change the tactics, to abandon what's not working, and they're willing to adapt and try something new. Why is that? Because to them, the goal matters more than their ego. In martial arts, you don't win by insisting that your opponent cooperate and adapt to your strategy or your preferred approach to fighting. You win by adapting to the person that's staring at you from the other side of the ring. You take what they give you and you exploit it to your advantage. So just like we know from the teaching of Og Mandino, I will persist until I succeed. So persistence is about continuing and continuing to move forward until you experience success. Now, don't forget, anyone can lead when everything's going according to plan, but true leadership is revealed when everything's not working as it should. Your plan A is about intention. Your plan A says, this is what I intend to do. But plan B is about options. It represents adaptability. Plan B asks, what are we going to do if things don't go as planned? You got to understand this. Black belt leaders, they prepare for what they know. They also plan for what could happen, the known unknown, so they can pivot if they do. Now, they also train themselves for what they may never see coming so they can respond in real time to the unknown unknown. Black belt leaders prepare, they pivot, they perform, and they persist. Because when things go wrong, and at some time they will, having a plan B in place, just in case, can be the difference between success and failure. So my question to you is this: do you have a Bismarck backup ready just in case? I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me, and have a great day.